Roald Dahl was one of the greatest children's authors of all time, and plenty of movies have been made from his books. But which adaptations are worth a watch, and which are you better off skipping? From worst to best, these are Rotten Tomatoes rankings of Roald Dahl movies. Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez made a Roald Dahl movie, which sounds like it could be either the greatest or worst thing in the world. And well, turns out it was the worst. Before Tarantino and Rodriguez teamed up for the anthology film Grindhouse, they were two of the 4 directors who participated in another anthology film, 4 Rooms. Loosely based on the adult short fiction works of Dahl, 4 Rooms is about the myriad adventures happening at a Hollywood hotel, with 4 separate segments tied together by the bellhop, played by Tim Roth. While none of the director's 4 individual segments are particularly great, Tarantino's is generally considered passable, though not quite enough to pass muster with critics. 4 Rooms received a 13% critic score and a 69% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, making it the worst movie on Tarantino's and Rodriguez's filmographies, as well as Dahl's. The Witches was first adapted to the big screen in 1990, and then again 30 years later in 2020. Well, not technically the big screen, as The Witches actually debuted as an HBO Max original. Set in 1967, the film finds a young orphan boy and his grandmother running across a convention of witches at a seaside hotel, which is led by the world's Grand High Witch, who, put simply, isn't a very nice woman.
I will reach into your chest and rip out your withered, shriveled heart.
Unfortunately, despite a wealth of talent in front of and behind the camera, The Witches crash lands on his flying broomstick. As one critic put it, like far too many unnecessary remakes, The Witches doesn't do enough to justify its existence. And while The Witches might have been meant for movie theaters, the results were mediocre whatever the medium. Actually, make that downright rotten, with 51% from critics and 42% from audiences on Rotten Tomatoes. All in all, it's not hard to imagine that Dahl would want nothing to do with this particular misfire. Danny the Champion of the World is a less well-known Roald Dahl novel released in 1975. It also inspired a mostly unseen TV movie in 1989. The movie adaptation pairs Jeremy Irons with his son, Samuel Irons, who play the titular Danny. Together, the two star as a widowed father and son who concoct a plan to get revenge on a snobby property developer. Danny the Champion of the World isn't exactly memorable, though it did inspire one critic to say that it resurrects a lost world of English life and entertainment with winning charm and aplomb. One being the operative word here, because Rotten Tomatoes only has a single review for this movie on its site. As such, Danny the Champion of the World has no critic score. However, its audience score is an underwhelming 64%. Maybe if more people saw it, the score would be higher, but as it stands, Danny may be the champion of the world, but he's not the champion of the tomato meter. Released in 1982, Roald Dahl's The BFG is about a big friendly giant, the clue's in the name, who befriends a precocious little girl named Sophie. Dahl's story was first adapted to the screen in 1989 as an animated feature. You'll be forgiven if you haven't seen it or even heard of it though, because pretty much nobody else has. The BFG only has 2 critical reviews, so it doesn't even have an official tomato meter score, though one critic praised it as a, quote, giant tale of imagination with a dark side, while another panned it as, quote, slight and unimpressive, so let's call it a wash. The audience score is an equally underwhelming 65%, which is still fresh but nothing to write home about. While the BFG would later go on to bigger and better things, the 1989 animated film was, alas, a big freaking dud. Esio Trot was Roald Dahl's last published novel, and it's just the kind of love story you would expect Dahl to write, revolving around a lonely old man named Mr. Hoppy, a widow named Mrs. Silver, and her pet tortoise, Alfie. Esio Trot was adapted into a BBC television film in 2015, with Dustin Hoffman as Mr. Hoppy, Judi Dench as Mrs. Silver, and James Corden narrating. This charming adaptation received plenty of critical acclaim, but it wasn't widely seen across the pond. Consequently, Esio Trot doesn't have an official critic score on Rotten Tomatoes, though the one critic who reviewed it said it was a decidedly daffy, rather ridiculously resplendent reptilian elder romance. Don't ask. Those who did see it quite enjoyed it too, giving the movie a respectable audience score of 72%. Steven Spielberg decided to take on the BFG in 2016 under the Disney banner. Spielberg, Dahl, and Disney sounds like the perfect combo, right? Sadly, the result of this historic pairing was just kind of okay. The critical consensus was that the BFG minimizes the darker elements of Roald Dahl's classic in favor of a resolutely good-natured, visually stunning, and largely successful family-friendly adventure. In other words, it's Disney at its safest. Other critics were more critical, with one writing, "Spielberg has become a hit-and-miss filmmaker, and this is closer to a miss than a hit." The critics' tomato score is currently at 74%, while audiences were much less impressed, giving it a 57%. Who would have thought the combined creative might of Spielberg, Dahl, and Disney could produce something so darn mediocre? Roald Dahl cemented his icon status by writing children's books, but he made his living by writing just about everything. And among Dahl's most interesting works is the 1965 suspense thriller 36 Hours, which holds the distinction of having been the first ever film adaptation of his writing. Set in occupied Germany in 1949, James Garner plays an amnesiac American military officer whose last memories were General Eisenhower's final directives before the Normandy invasion 5 years earlier. But soon, the American officer realizes the psychiatrist he thought was trying to help him is actually out to get him. 36 Hours is based on a 1944 Dahl short story called Beware of the Dog, which aptly demonstrates just how different Dahl was during the war. After all, the man was a spy and a fighter pilot. The results are impressive too, on both the page and the big screen, as 36 Hours boasts an 80% critic score and a 77% audience score, marking the movie as the best adaptation of Dahl's adult fiction. Johnny Depp really could do no wrong in the mid-2000s. He had just redefined himself from quirky indie darling actor to quirky A-lister by starring in Pirates of the Caribbean: Curse of the Black Pearl. And a year before the sequel, Dead Man's Chest, came out, Depp took a detour to Dahl. In 2005, he reunited with his buddy Tim Burton to play Willy Wonka in arguably Roald Dahl's most famous story, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. While it may have seemed counterintuitive at the time, Burton's cinematic sensibilities toward the creepy and the spooky were actually the perfect fit for Roald Dahl's work, which always managed to blend the surreal and scary with the silly. And at the time, you weren't going to get a better actor to play the world-famous but notoriously reclusive chocolatier than Johnny Depp.
I love your chocolate.
I can see that. So do I. I never expected to have so much in common.
The team had their work cut out for them, however, as whatever they made would inevitably be compared to the iconic 1971 film, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Luckily, Burton, Depp, and team were up to the task, as Charlie and the Chocolate Factory scored an 83% critic score, though moviegoers didn't find the film nearly so sweet, giving it a disappointingly rotten 51%. Danny DeVito is a genuine national treasure, but you already knew that, didn't you? Before he reinvented himself as Frank Reynolds on It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, DeVito was actually an acclaimed actor and filmmaker, and among his most famous films was his 1996 adaptation of Roald Dahl's Matilda. Released in 1988, Matilda is arguably Roald Dahl's last great work. It tells the story of a young girl named Matilda Wormwood, who has wicked parents, a cruel headmistress, and some extraordinary powers. DeVito cast himself and then wife Rhea Perlman as Matilda's parents, while Mara Wilson of Mrs. Doubtfire and Miracle on 34th Street fame earned the role of the eponymous Matilda. Critics noted, while the movie diverges from Roald Dahl, it nonetheless captures the book's spirit. Matilda also captured an impressive tomato meter score too, 90% from critics and 73% from moviegoers. Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is arguably the most iconic Roald Dahl movie adaptation. Heck, it's one of the most beloved family movies of all time, period, and the movie has charmed viewers of all ages since it was released in 1971. Surprisingly, however, one viewer who wasn't charmed was Roald Dahl. According to a biography of the author by his friend Donald Sturrock, Dahl didn't much care for the music or the director and had, quote, serious reservations with Gene Wilder's performance as the titular Willy Wonka, despite that same performance having gone down in movie history.
You get nothing! You lose! Good day, sir!
According to Sturrock, Roald eventually came to tolerate the film, but he never liked it. Dahl was mostly alone in his assessment of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, however, which boasts a 90% critic score and an 87% moviegoer score. It took decades for filmmakers to realize Roald Dahl's stories were perfect fodder for stop-motion animation. Finally, however, 1996 saw the release of James and the Giant Peach, by far one of the best Roald Dahl adaptations. 9 years before Tim Burton directed Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, he produced James and the Giant Peach, by employing the same stop-motion techniques as the iconic stop-motion film The Nightmare Before Christmas. Helmed by Nightmare director Henry Selick, James and the Giant Peach was praised by critics, with Rotten Tomatoes consensus reading, "The arresting and dynamic visuals, offbeat details, and light-as-air storytelling make James and the Giant Peach solid family entertainment." Critics gave the movie an impressive 91% tomato meter score, though moviegoers were much less impressed, with a decidedly unripened 66% score. Moviegoers' apathy with James and the Giant Peach was reflected in the film's box office too, which bombed hard with a meager $28 million worldwide. When it comes to fantasy stories that entertain children and adults alike, few can match the talent of Roald Dahl. One who certainly can, however, is Jim Henson, creator of Sesame Street and The Muppets. Dahl's talent for storytelling and Henson's creative prowess as a producer came together in 1990's The Witches, and the results were nothing less than magical. According to Rotten Tomatoes consensus, The Witches is a dark and witty movie that captures the spirit of Roald Dahl's imagination like few other adaptations. Critics also praised Angelica Houston's quote, "deliciously wicked performance as a Grand High Witch," as well as Jim Henson's typically brilliant puppetry. All in all, everybody was on top of their game with this one, resulting in one of the most impressive and faithful adaptations of Roald Dahl's work. And it's got the tomato score to prove it too, with 93% from critics and 70% from audiences. Fantastic Mr. Fox is a movie truly worthy of its name. Roald Dahl published the anthropomorphic adventures of Mr. Fox, Mrs. Fox, and their family and their friends in 1970, and in 2009, Wes Anderson adapted the story for his first venture into stop-motion animation. While Fantastic Mr. Fox's brisk 96 pages are as delightfully Dahl as it gets, the story isn't quite as best known. Nonetheless, the quirky whimsy of Dahl's lesser-appreciated story matches perfectly with Anderson's cinematic sensibilities.
By the way, you look unbelievably beautiful tonight. You're practically glowing. Maybe it's the lighting.
While the two acclaimed artists never met, Anderson clearly shares a creative kinship with Dahl, and both managed to cultivate a similar sense of childlike spirit in their works, and that spirit comes together perfectly with Mr. Fox. Critics seem to agree too, and with a 93% critic score and 85% audience score, Fantastic Mr. Fox ranks as the finest Roald Dahl adaptation to date. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more Looper videos about your favorite movies are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.